Joining me on the live line is Richard C. Bell. He's an election law expert and an attorney. And so with that, Attorney Bell, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well, Perri. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I am really interested about what is going on. What is the worst case scenario we will see, seeing that we are, most of us are voting by mail, I believe, for this upcoming election on November 3rd. What's the worst scenario you can see, that you would see around the corner?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's starting now because you have a president that is trying to inject a crisis of confidence in the integrity of the whole system that doesn't exist, because the voter fraud stuff is complete nonsense. Every study shows it's a complete myth. But he is trying to set the stage for this crisis of confidence, whether he loses the election or right now starting to spread these rumors about the integrity of the system to discourage voters. So I think the biggest problem is that people get discouraged. Can't do that. Because the number 1, 2, and 3 things that everyone in your audience has to do, early when it comes to voting. Mm-hmm. It is everything right now, because whether you're going to do it by mail, whether you're going to do it by early voting in person, you got to do it early, because number one, if there's a problem, you can fix it.
So,
and number two,
go ahead.
Avoid crowds.
Okay.
I was going to say you avoid crowds.
All right. Are there any states that don't have early voting?
Oh, yes. We live in a country that early voting is not allowed. I think it's now 17 states. 17 states. And
yes, most of these are what we would call red states, right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. Now, this is really disturbing because, you know, especially what's going on in the South. I mean, with COVID, the misinformation, and that's what this administration has done since they stepped in the White House. The misinformation that comes out of this administration, and the people that believe it is what just drives me crazy.
Oh, it's infuriating.
Do they really believe this president like that, in your opinion?
Okay, so number one, let me correct myself. It was 11 states, not 17.
Okay.
I just always like to be accurate.
Okay.
But, yes, what's infuriating is I just wrote a book called Voting, the Ultimate Act of Resistance. Mm-hmm. And I always say, why, if it wasn't the ultimate act of resistance, why would one party be so intent on limiting it? Because that is the history of the Republican Party in the modern era. So you and me and most normal people say, well, what do you mean? Voting should be easy. Of course it should be easy.
Right.
I mean, online shopping is easy. Why shouldn't voting be easy?
Right.
But there's been this game plan for a long time because Republicans know that in many instances they can't win if it's a level playing field.
Right.
So what I've been doing on Election Day for many years is fighting voter suppression. I do it at the polls and in the courtroom. And what happens is you see these efforts. Sometimes it's the poll workers, sometimes it's in the court cases, the Republican lawyers. They're always trying to create barriers. Whether it's something technical about a voter registration that's being questioned. When I was doing this in Florida, mm-hmm. It was a poll worker that kept sending people out saying, no, you're in the wrong address. You can't sign an affidavit of change of address, which is completely against the law. But it went on dozens and dozens and dozens of times in 2016 where I was at the poll in Florida. Uh-huh. And you don't have to guess. It was all black and brown people he sent back out, and I have sent back in.
So what did you do? I mean, because I can't even remember what they call it here. I'm kind of having a blank right now. But we can provisionals. We can always, here in Illinois, there's such thing as provisional ballots. those are not even in all 50 states and some of the territories, are they?
Well, actually, provisional ballots are. The problem is the percentages of those that are thrown out really vary by the state. And as you can imagine, it's a good percentage that stay in California and a low percentage that stay in a place like Texas. Because what happens is the provisional ballots, which you fill out by hand when you're at the polling place, they check it against certain, whether it's signature matches or absentee ballots, and many times they just throw it out and they don't tell you.
Well, that's subjective. But that's subjective.
Yeah. Well, that is why, Perri, you're completely right. And one of the things, and I think we all need to say it out loud right now, is that voter suppression in this new Jim Crow era of the last 30 years, where they've been obviously targeting black and brown people, and the media's kind of given that lip service over the years, but I noticed that when the post office gets manipulated, and Jim Crow is, in a sense, being brought to white people, it's become a national crisis overnight. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I talked about it weeks before, like they say, the sugar hit the fan. I was talking about it weeks ago because I did know that this is what they're doing. And, I mean, to trot out this guy, DeJoy, like he is some normal, conscientious American, it's the craziest thing in the world to me. Go and hire you, Richard, hire Attorney Bell and others to sue the hell out of these folks for doing this.
Well, there are state suits going on against the post office right now. They were filed, I believe, on Friday in 6 different states.
Right. Because
this is beyond outrageous. Obviously, we have a House of Representatives that passed the bill, but coming in through the Senate, we don't have any confidence in that. But you know what I think most of all, there's really 3 levels here. We understand what Congress can and cannot do, and they're trying, but with the Senate, we're not confident.
Right.
The states, which is who controls the election apparatus, a number of them have gone to the automatic mailing of ballots, or like in Illinois, the automatic mailing of applications for ballots, and changing other states that the postmark is the date that you have to have. It has to be election day postmark and things of that nature. But what I'd like to emphasize to your audience is the obligation of the voter, because we all know that we need now to go from rage to engage. We've got to vote. We just got to vote. Our lives all depend on it. There's no question. So I think everyone needs to have a plan on voting. And the best way to have a plan is you go to this nonpartisan website called vote.org.
Right.
And you go to Illinois, and it will tell you what all the rules are, and will tell you exactly what you have to do, and it can tell you where you can drop off if you don't want to go through the post office. You can go to those drop boxes in Illinois. They're going to be at the early voting sites in Illinois. But you got to start early.
Well, I would do that, but I was going to do that anyway because I didn't want to go pushing any buttons on machines that other people had been at.
Gotcha. We're in a pandemic. Yes, for sure.
I mean, in the middle of a pandemic. And listen, I think last year or something might have been the first time I did the early voting, and I love it. I absolutely recommend it to everyone. 9:48 on Talk of Chicago. We're talking to Richard C. Bell. And you're somewhat of an aberration, Attorney Bell, because I do not know I don't know any African Americans in this Irish led city when it comes to election law. I don't know any African Americans that do this work.
Well, Perri, I like to think I have an African